When Crytek released Crysis in 2007, it was so hard to run on contemporary PCs that "but can it run Crysis?" turned into both a serious benchmark and a joke. Quoting the founder of Crytek and game director Jevat Yerli, "I wanted to make sure Crysis does not age. If I played it 3 years from now, it should look better than today." And the way Crytek accomplished this was by making a game in 2007 that was designed to run on hardware that hopefully should be out by 2010. And they succeeded to the point where, when in 2011 a port of the game was released on Xbox 360 and PS3, it wasn't using the engine from the PC game because it was too much for them. It was actually running on a way less resource-hungry CryEngine 3. So if this game from 2007 was meant to be run on hardware from 2010, what can we, in the future of 2025, which is literally 5 years after the future setting of the game, do with it? We can play it on a phone. I'm not talking about some weird dumbed-down port with 60% of the content removed. I'm talking about the fact that you can right now grab a normal PC copy of the game, transfer it to your Android phone, and if it's powerful enough, just play the game. I wanted to cover this topic for a while, but just recently RedMagic offered me to sponsor this video and give me their latest RedMagic 10 Pro, which is perfect for this. This phone was designed for gaming from the ground up. You can tell from the notchless 144Hz display, there's a camera here, but it's hidden, the L and R triggers on the top here, or the fact it has a freaking fan. But most importantly, it comes with the Snapdragon 8 Elite, which as far as I can tell is the most powerful mobile chip on the market right now, so it's gonna be like the best test platform for me to use to show you how this works. Speaking of which, how is any of this working? We're running a PC game on an Android phone. What? So apparently I'm back in the void, but it's white this time around for some reason. Anyway, let's understand how we got to this point where we live in the future and we can play Windows games on an Android cell phone. During the past decade or so, we've seen a huge boom in performance when it comes to ARM chips, like the Snapdragon 8 Elite in this RedMagic 10 Pro, or basically any chip in any phone or tablet. ARM has been for years associated with efficiency. It's great because it doesn't use a lot of power, so it's mostly used in mobile phones, tablets, and stuff like single-board computers, like Raspberry Pis, for example. So for the longest time, it was widely accepted that you should go with ARM if you were mostly looking for efficiency, but if you were looking for true raw power, you should go with x86/x64, which is the architecture used by Intel and AMD CPUs. Most of them, at least. They did some weird stuff sometimes, but basically most computers are running on x86. Your computer is probably running on x86. It's been pretty much the norm since before I was born. Until in 2020, Apple started shifting their entire lineup of computers from Intel CPUs to in-house ARM CPUs. And this was considered to be a bold move back then because the entire industry didn't consider ARM CPUs as a real option for workstations. The idea being that, yeah, ARM CPUs have been getting faster, but most computer software is written for x86 CPUs, so translating it on the fly would be way too slow for any real-world application. Until Apple, launching their new Apple Silicon computers based on ARM, basically said, shut the fuck up, look at this is how it's done. To overcome the how the f do we make this legacy x86 code run on ARM CPUs without it being James May's law problem, Apple did two things. The first one was obvious, and it's don't have legacy code. They managed to port most of their proprietary software from x86 to ARM. Then again, wow, congratulations, you win the obvious solution award. But what about all of the software made by everyone else during decades? Well, the second thing they did was Rosetta 2, named after Rosetta 1. This wasn't the first time Apple completely switched architectures. Rosetta 2 is an incredibly fast x86 to ARM translation layer that's built into macOS, so you don't even have to think about it. And what makes it so fast is that instead of stopping every instruction one by one as it comes and translating it, it scans a lot of code beforehand, all at once, translates it, and then runs that translated version. Editor's note here, I need to specify this or I'm going to get the microcode mafia at my doorstep. Rosetta 2 also does partially use just-in-time, but it's more of a backup solution as far as my research tells me. But what's important here is that with this, Apple proved that yes, you could actually run x86 applications on ARM with around a 78% efficiency. And this was sort of the first piece of the domino that kind of shifted everything, leading me to being able to run Crysis on my RedMagic 10 Pro. After Apple frankly embarrassed everyone in the room, some projects started to pop up that wanted to do the same thing as Rosetta 2, but with any non-Apple CPU. So the idea was writing an open source layer that could convert x86/x64 code into something that ARM CPUs, like the one in this phone, can actually run. The relevant one for us is Box64, which is an open source translation layer designed to do exactly what Rosetta 2 is doing, but on any ARM CPU. Unlike Rosetta 2, it is not doing ahead of time code execution, it is actually doing just in time, but by using runtime caching and trying to make the code use the native libraries of whatever system you're running it on, it is still pretty fast, which means we can game on it. So, you have your phone, you have your game, you can just use Box64 to make everything work, right? You can't just install Box64 on Android and automatically make every Windows game work. That's not how it works. So during the past few years, a few projects have started popping up that try to bridge this gap between Box64 and Android. They try to provide everything that's needed in between to make games work on Android. There are several closed and open source projects that aim to do this, but today we're going to be focusing specifically on Winlator, an open source project by BrunoDev85, which in my experience has been the most interesting and reliable one, and also the one pushing the entire meta forward. Now, it's kind of difficult to explain how this gap gets bridged, but according to my analytics here, most of you are Americans, so imagine a burger. Imagine the top bun being your phone, and the bottom bun being the Windows game you're trying to run. How do we get this to understand what this is? The first layer is Android, okay? It's the operating system on the phone. It lets you do a lot of cool stuff, but it doesn't let you just play games designed for a completely different architecture and operating system. But Android is based on Linux. And that's what the next layer is leveraging, proot. Proot lets us use a pseudo Linux environment without having root access. The next layer is then a based Linux system based on Ubuntu Focal Fossa. And then you have Wine, which is not an emulator. It's a compatibility layer that is translating Windows API calls to Linux ones. Essentially, when a game is asking Windows to do something, this is translating it into something that Linux can understand. But Wine only works on x86/x64 CPUs, so going to the next layer you have Box86/Box64, which is translating the Linux x86 API calls to ARM API calls that can be understood by Linux for ARM/Android/ this entire thing. And then to handle the graphical elements like the things on screen, you also have different 3D renderers depending on what game you're running. Specifically, this is very variable and also depends on your hardware. We'll get to it later. If your first thought after this is, this shouldn't work, you're right, but it does. It actually does, and it's amazing. So here we have our RedMagic 10 Pro. I decided to record this without basically any cuts because I want to show you that I'm not doing anything weird here. What you're seeing here is what you can do easily with this phone and Winlator. I have this case on that came with the phone. Let me actually take it off because I want to show you the phone without any clothes on. It's a pretty nice looking phone, and I like that despite it being clearly a gaming phone. I mean, just take a look at this fan here. In this sort of white coloration, it is kind of a sleeper until you turn it on and you press this and you turn on that fan and it's making engine noises. Or if you click here, you get a built-in waifu. Now let's get to business. Let me slide this thing here, this slider, and we get this NVIDIA style intro, which brings us to the game space, which basically turns this phone into a game console. We even got like every possible setting here to configure and push CPU and GPU to the limit, which is what we're going to do because I want to show you how Winlator runs on here. What you see here is Winlator, and it is actually pretty easy to set up. After you install it and set up the files, you just need to create a container here. You name it, you select the Vortex driver for this phone because the Turnip drivers for this new Snapdragon chips are not out yet, which means we're leaving some performance on the table, but this phone is fast enough that you usually don't have to care about it. We'll get to that later. But yeah, after you set everything up here, you create a container, you boot into it. Let me just do this. We have this Windows Explorer-like thing here, and we need to go to D. This is our downloads folder on the phone. And from here, we can double-click and boot on any game installers we have copied on the phone. In my case, I've already done all of that, so I'm just going to boot into my Crysis container, which I set up earlier, and I'm going to show you how straightforward this is. So I've got my Crysis 64 shortcut here. And we are already in game. Let me actually turn on the virtual gamepad here. Okay, so we can actually move forward. Come on, picking off the NVIDIA logo. Okay, oh my god, this is so nostalgic, but also like this phone is running circles around the Core 2 Extreme. We are living in the future, man, I'm telling you. And as you can see, we are running the Windows version of Crysis here. Now, this touchscreen inputs actually cover half of the screen for you, so I'm going to use this GameSir something phone controller here. This looks and feels like a proper game console. Now we have this glitch going on here with the white bar, but it's easily fixable. It's a Crysis glitch. I just need to go to the graphics here and turn full screen off and then back on again. There we go. So we're running the game at 720p with every single setting to medium except for motion blur, which is off. I'm going to push it to very high later on, but right now we're just going to run it like this and see how it goes. So we're getting like 80 to 100 FPS right now, which is pretty mind-blowing. Like we're playing Crysis for computer without any optimizations through like a burger of emulation layers and stuff on a phone. Let's get into some like fight. See if the frame rate drops. Okay, so here we should see, yeah, we're seeing some dips, but it's still like 60, 70 right now. Let's press B. Okay, that's a freeze, but now we're back. And okay, there are some graphical glitches sometimes. Okay, so I have restarted the container because it usually fixes every like texture glitch. So far it's pretty stable. Let me enable the binoculars. Okay. Sometimes you can see some dips when doing some stuff, and I suppose that's due to the like shader cache building. None of this is supposed to run on this phone, but it's running, and it's running at around like 60 FPS. There are some dips again, but like this is smooth. I can confidently say this is running pretty good. This is way better than how Crysis used to run on my desktop computer years ago. Now, let's actually try to kick this up a notch and push every single thing to very high. I want to see how it handles it. So here, very high, except for the motion blur. We have, again, some dips, but we are hovering around 40 FPS. Okay, some stutters. Yeah, if you want to play this, you're probably better off playing it on medium. But again, we are playing PC Crysis on a phone. This is pretty f***ing wild. Now, I decided to go with Crysis for the title and thumbnail because it's a good clickbait, even though it's not really a clickbait, it's a real thing, I'm doing it. But there are other games which I've tested on here that run way, way better than Crysis, to the point where the experience is pretty much on par with the one that I have on my gaming desktop computer. For example, Driver San Francisco is running flawlessly on here. I've managed to get the game running at around 60 FPS all the time, at 1080p maxed out with anti-aliasing enabled, and it's a better experience here than playing it on my Steam Deck, which says a lot. I am actually considering replaying it through the entire thing on the phone just to see how stable it is, but so far I am extremely impressed. I've also managed to make Fallout New Vegas run on here, and this wasn't as straightforward as Crysis. You need to set some specific DXVK variables, and also Fallout New Vegas in general doesn't really run well on modern computers without mods because it was made in 2010 and it's not optimized for stuff like multi-core CPUs. But running it here at 720p with a low quality preset, after some initial stuttering, which I suppose was due to the shader cache building, I was able to run it around 60 FPS all the time, without any issues. I was using a new save here and I was just walking around Good Springs and everything just worked. Now, I have to mention that the RedMagic 10 Pro is an extremely powerful phone, but it also just came out, so When I'm using Winlator on it, I am stuck with the Vortex drivers for now, which are universal drivers that work with every phone GPU, not being specifically tailor-made for this series of Snapdragon Adreno GPUs. Some performance is being left on the table and you can run into some graphical issues or some games won't run. In order to show you how much Turnip drivers make a difference, I do have here an older RedMagic phone, a 9 Pro. Having been out for a while, you get the advantage of it already having community support for the Turnip Adreno drivers here, which means that, for example, I am able to run Fallout New Vegas here on Ultra. Yippee! We are running the game on Ultra and we are getting a pretty high frame rate here, thanks to the Turnip drivers. And again, the 9 Pro here is less powerful than the 10 Pro, so I am actually very hyped to see what is going to happen, like what kind of performance are we going to reach when the Turnip drivers are gonna come out for the 10 Pro. So should you throw out your gaming computer and play everything on your gaming phone from now on? Not yet. While the hardware is clearly more than powerful enough, I mean, remember, everything here is running through a burger of compatibility layers. The software side is still kind of finicky. So compatibility-wise, you might run into some issues, some games won't run. But if you love tinkering to make stuff run, this is very rewarding. Editor Femi here again. I just want to take a second to mention how DRM is a bitch. When I was testing Crysis here, I had to use the GOG version because DRM gives you so many headaches, and it's not a Winlator problem, it's a pretty common problem even just with Linux gaming. And of course, I would never tell you to get a no CD crack for a game. I would never tell you that. That's very bad. Never do that. When it comes to some games like Portal 2 that don't really run well or don't run at all on Winlator, I've managed to find a way to make them work on the RedMagic 10 Pro regardless. There is a video game console that is made in Japan. For various reasons, I'm not going to name it, but I'll say that it's also using an ARM CPU and it's portable. And yeah, in like 20 minutes, I managed to get an emulator up and running on my RedMagic 10 Pro and played Portal 2 using that. I've also tried running the mysterious console version of Crysis Remastered on the RedMagic 10 Pro, and it's crashing unfortunately, but after also testing it on the 9 Pro with the Turnip drivers enabled, it's working perfectly there, so I know it's a driver problem and I can't wait until Turnip drivers come out on the 10 Pro because it's going to be insane. Also, if you're wondering how I managed to capture full screen video from the RedMagic 10 Pro, if you connect a USB-C dock to it with HDMI out and enable game space, you're gonna put the phone into console mode, which basically turns it into a sort of more powerful NVIDIA shield. I gotta give credit to RedMagic because the controller support even through Winlator was flawless. I had some problems with mouse and keyboard, so I wouldn't say using Winlator with mouse and keyboard is still something you can do reliably, but using a Bluetooth or USB controller works perfectly. I had a blast with it. I also managed to make the phone with one single cable power and output video to a USB-C screen that I'm building for a future project, and it was doing that at 2560 by 1600 240 Hz. This is so cool. The one problem that I have with the console mode is very minor, but I hope RedMagic addresses it, and it's this little arrow here that no matter what you do stays on screen, which is very bad if you have an OLED TV because it can cause burn-in. Just please add an option to make it invisible and you fix the problem. The kind of power we are reaching on consumer hardware like this RedMagic 10 Pro and open source projects like Winlator and Pojaf Launcher here, which I just discovered, and it's a Minecraft client that lets you play the full desktop Minecraft on your phone, make me think that in the future gaming is going to be way more accessible because thanks to raw power and all these projects, we are literally going to be able to emulate or virtualize every game on every platform. And that's going to be wild. This is one of the few things that make me hopeful about the future of tech nowadays, and yeah, it's amazing. All I'm saying is that you can run the Crazy Frog Racer 2 on your phone right now. You're welcome.